Hello and welcome to TaleTeller's universe. If you are looking for some horror, sci-fi, or comedy, you're in the right place. I've got some flash fiction and short stories for you. This week I'm happy to bring you an original story called Vega. And as a treat, it's not just my voice, but you'll also find the voice of Rish Outfield. If you're familiar with Rish's work, then you know you're in for a good time. He is a prolific podcaster, voice actor, and author. So, without further ado, Vega by Jonathan Lee Wilson.
There it is again. Pay up,
exclaimed Specialist Donaldson. His teammate, Specialist Williams, was hopeful this would be the time the data would show the slightest variation. It was boring work, and the occasional wager broke the monotony. "Fine, take it," Williams grumbled. He slapped a 20 on the desk in front of Donaldson. The two enlisted men sat up straight when they heard Major Jennings enter the door behind them. Donaldson quickly grabbed the 20 and stuffed it into his fatigues. "Anything to report?" Jennings asked, furrowing his brow. He was narrowly avoiding a migraine again. This field work was not what he had in mind when he transferred from the Air Force to the Space Force 6 months ago. Like most, he envisioned an easy job doing paperwork at the Pentagon. Instead, here he was assigned to a remote listening station in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The signals had been coming every night for the last 3 months. Like clockwork, the facility's readouts lit up like a Christmas tree from 1800 hours to 2100 hours. Their experts ruled out humans as the source almost immediately. However, naturally occurring signals don't keep such precise timing on the scale of a 24-hour Earth day. Whatever its true origins, the definitive answer had eluded the best minds of the world. Traditionally, this would fall under the purview of the scientific community. However, since the inception of the Space Force, likely communications from unknown entities outside of planet Earth would be a potential threat the higher-ups could not ignore. Major Jennings was irritable this evening. Aside from his headache, his superiors were breathing down his neck for some kind of answer to the million-dollar question: who or what was doing this? Perhaps the most important question: what are their intentions? They had run computer simulations and artificially intelligent algorithms, but to no avail. "Do you have any insight on what this is?" he asked the men sitting at their workstation.
No, sir. There's been no change to the signal since it sped up 2 days ago,
replied Donaldson. "I was sure it would change tonight," Williams chimed, looking at Andrew Jackson poking out from Donaldson's pocket. He suddenly remembered protocol and quickly added, sir." Speculation abounded in the scientific community. Several space agencies worldwide had suggested the signal was being broadcast from the Vega system. However, the signal appeared to be moving. In order for the signal to be transmitted from varied locations approximately 25 light-years away, it would have to be traveling incredibly fast. The speeds necessary to cause this discernible change in location frankly kept the Major up at night. He was a military man through and through, but he also had a passion for science. Jennings came from a long line of nerds who just happened to serve their country. He would be happy in a laboratory, but the listening station involved more tents than test tubes. It was time for his daily report to the Pentagon. He had come to dread this part. His commanding officer, General Pendleton, preferred to make his report by video conference. He enjoyed watching the Major sweat if the answer wasn't to his liking. Jennings made sure his uniform looked just right before logging into the server. The General's wrinkly bald head appeared on his screen. To Major Jennings, Pendleton looked like an old cantaloupe with beady eyes. Jennings saluted his superior and began his report. Unfortunately, nothing new. Jennings was interrupted by Specialist Williams running into the officer's tent. He nearly fell on his face when he realized the Major was giving his report. "Sorry to interrupt, sir. I think you'd better come have a look. The signal's doing something it's never done before." Williams stood at attention. He didn't need the Pentagon getting on his case for talking out of line. Major Jennings looked back at the camera and with an expression of gratitude addressed the General. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I need to deal with this. I'll report back as soon as I assess the situation.
Finally something new. I look forward to your next briefing. You're dismissed, Major,
he said, reaching toward the disconnect button. Major Jennings could feel his headache lifting slightly already. He was curious what change had spurred Williams to burst into his tent. When the Major arrived at the observation tent, he was almost floored to hear what sounded like speech coming through the external speakers. Flashes of light appeared on the screen, but only for fractions of a second. Something about this spot on Earth was special. For some reason they had yet to determine, the unknown entities chose to send a tight, targeted beam to this mountaintop and nowhere else. If some hiker hadn't picked up the weird signal on a walkie-talkie one night, no one would have known to look for it. This was the whole reason Major Jennings and his handful of soldiers had been assigned to this particular spot in the mountains of Nevada. Now things were going from an odd beam of intense energy from another star system to something you could hear and in theory see. It was too bad the audio sounded like a cross between an angry seagull and someone clearing their throat. "Is that some kind of language?" Jennings inquired of the two men.
Whatever it is, sir, it has to be extraterrestrial.
Donaldson replied with a look of unease. Why this communication? Why now? "I'm going to run this through the computer and see if we can determine what it's saying. I know I'm curious, and the world will be too. The general is going to flip his top when he hears about this. Is there any updated data on the signal's current location, Specialist?"
According to current readings, sir, the signal appears to be getting closer, and at a high speed.
Donaldson looked at Williams as he spoke. Williams chimed in. "Computer models are suggesting the origin point must be moving at least 70% the speed of light." Jennings was taken aback. The energy requirements necessary to accelerate so quickly was astonishing. 70%, are you sure? Major Jennings knew the implications. There were really only two options: extreme power at its disposal, or it was tiny and weighed next to nothing. Perhaps it was just a probe of some kind. Well, I'll be damned. What do we make of those flashes on the screen?
Seems like somebody trying to make a video call. Reminds me of my grandma. She has terrible internet access at her house.
Donaldson scratched his head and tapped the screen with his index finger. The image suddenly appeared to clear up slightly. It was still intermittent, but the image was there long enough to see it was not a human on the other end. "I hope that's not what your grandmother looks like," remarked Williams. Donaldson gave his squadmate a withering glance.
Very funny.
The face on the screen was fuzzy and cut out every few seconds. Its skin was gray and mottled. The eyes were large pools of ebony, while its nose was barely there. Its mouth was little more than a slit in its face. The strange language continued to play from the speakers. It didn't make any sense yet, but considering the face, it was apparent why. An alarm tone sounded, and the readouts began to brighten and intensify. Energy crackled across the surface of the console in arcs of electricity. The two men lifted their hands in fear of being cooked by the mini bolts of lightning. The nonsensical language stopped and was suddenly replaced by a raspy voice speaking in German.
"Wir kommen,"
were its only words. "We're coming, oh geez," Williams remarked. "Looks like I've got a call to make." Jennings turned and headed toward his tent. Major Jennings updated the general on the relevant changes. It was difficult for Jennings to get a read on General Pendleton's mood. His face had one setting, annoyed. The general almost showed emotion when the mention of the German language came up. "Does anything faze this guy?" he thought to himself.
Indications are, based on the specific nature of their communications, they will eventually make contact at your encampment. I've arranged for the 328th Weapons Squadron out of Nellis to be on alert and ready to support your position if the need arises. Lieutenant Colonel Emerson has been fully briefed on the situation. If there's a first contact scenario, I want you to handle it, Major Jennings. I have full confidence in your abilities and experience. Handle this right and you'll find yourself promoted in no time. Any questions, Major?
"No, sir, you've covered all I need to know at this time. I reviewed the top secret protocols, and I feel I'm capable of making the right call." Today was turning out much better than he thought it would be.
Very good, Major. I'd like an update on the unidentified entity's ETA. Your team should have the resources to calculate how much time we got.
As soon as I have the most updated intel, you'll be hearing from me. The Major saluted his CO and cut off the feed. Jennings slumped into his chair. The headache wanted his attention again, and not even Pendleton would quiet it down. He opened a file drawer attached to his desk and pulled out a short bottle of Hornito's Black Label tequila. He poured 2 fingers into a tumbler and brought out his headache meds. The liquor chased the 2 pills down nicely. German-speaking aliens from the Vega system. What next? 2 more days had passed, and computer models finally had the answer they were looking for. Depending on the mass of the object, it could be within 2 astronomical units within the week. This was getting real. The personnel stationed here were nervous. Every time Jennings passed someone, the smell of fear was in the air. The normally bustling mess hall was nearly silent. Soldiers picked at the chow on their trays and stared in contemplation of the coming convergence of humans and alien beings. The stillness was broken by the sound of an alarm. The time had finally come. Their estimates were far from accurate. They should have more time. Trays of food hit the ground, and chairs fell backwards as soldiers leapt up and headed to the armory. Minutes later, dozens of Space Force Guardians stood in formation, ready to deal lethal damage to the potential threat. One man doubled over and coated his boots in his lunch. Major Jennings held up his arm, signaling all to hold and be at the ready. The air was thick and crackled with energy. Heavy cloud cover made seeing the stars impossible. Points of light swirled through the haze like embers of some cosmic fire. They coalesced into a single point of light, like a brilliant jewel in the night sky. The probe was no larger than the head of a match. It hovered 4 feet above the ground and rotated in place. It gained speed moment by moment, flashing pulses of illumination and harsh shadows on the faces of the slack-jawed soldiers. The technology they were seeing was decades, maybe even centuries ahead of anything mankind had produced. A burst of light flashed up, and an image of a gray alien with black eyes appeared before them. It was enormous, 40 feet from the top of its head to its receded chin. The creature spoke, hardly moving its tiny mouth. Its speech was somehow tied to their systems of loudspeakers and cameras. Major Jennings had anticipated this. They had used their systems to communicate before, and the creature spoke in German again. After all, the first signals strong enough to be broadcast into space were of Adolf Hitler at the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin. He officially opened the games, delivering a brief speech as part of the opening ceremony. These were no doubt the first signals encountered by these gray aliens. First impressions mean everything. Donaldson was ready to make any adjustments to their equipment as necessary. He kept his hand poised to raise or lower volume, enable or disable video cameras, even translate speech into other languages. The translation program kicked in the moment the creature spoke, and the crowd of military personnel were able to hear what it said in real time.
Greetings, humans. We are the superior race originating from the star system you refer to as Vega. We have seen your thirst for conquest, heard the voice of your Führer Adolf. We wish to warn you, we are more than capable of vanquishing your war machine. Prepare to lay down your arms and submit to our will. We are coming.
Major Jennings acted quickly and spoke up. Greetings. We do not know what you call your people. We identify you by your skin tone, which is distinct from our own. We shall refer to you as Greys. As you are representing your people, I too am proud to serve as an ambassador on behalf of my people. May I ask your name? I'm called Major Jennings. The image froze for a moment, as if processing the response by the human representative. A heartbeat later, it spoke again.
We are pleased to greet you, Major Jennings. My name cannot be properly spoken by you due to your human physiology. However, you may address me as Heinrich.
The alien continued.
Our kind have observed your species for many revolutions around your host star. Our technology far exceeds your own, More importantly, your species will soon destroy itself without intervention. We, Greys, as you call us, have the power to root out your self-destructive tendencies and bring about peace and prosperity for your kind. We only require your planet's natural resources.
Well, Heinrich, you will find that humanity is very resilient and quite stubborn. Your first encounter with our radio signals has skewed your perception of us as a species, judging from the use of 1930s Germany as a point of reference. I invite you to discuss peaceful relations between our cultures. Major Jennings knew this meeting, this moment in time, could mean the difference between destruction of the human race and untold technological advances. The pressure was immense, and he needed a moment to think. Heinrich, allow me a moment to consult with my colleagues. There's much to contemplate, he said to the giant head floating above the terrified group of soldiers.
You may proceed.
Heinrich blinked, his eyes pulsing as a membrane slid across the black surface of his enormous optics. Major Jennings turned to Donaldson and gave the signal for him to mute the audio and switch off the video feed. The specialist flicked a few switches, depressed a few buttons, and nodded back to his commanding officer. Jennings really didn't need to consult anyone. He just needed a moment to think things through. There was no chance that giving up Earth's natural resources would be acceptable to anyone. He looked up at the giant face, who happened to be drinking a glowing beverage from a cup with a winding novelty straw like a young child would, and made a decision how he wanted to proceed. Jennings looked back at Donaldson and indicated he wanted communications restored. Donaldson went through the steps and pointed to show everything was ready to go. The moment Major Jennings turned to face the alien image, Heinrich's face somehow looked more pale, if such a thing was possible. He looked shocked.
What is this? Clearly you are not what you seem.
The alien looked to the side, off-camera as if to address someone, and then continued.
We have decided to postpone our next visit and to discontinue communications.
The tiny probe powered down, and the image suddenly cut off. The men and women gathered there looked at each other in stunned confusion. Major Jennings raised his hands. What happened? The moment he spoke, the minuscule probe flashed to life and shot into the sky and out of sight. The Major scratched the back of his head and looked up for the now missing probe. I guess go back to your normal duties. I need to update the General, he said to the group of soldiers nearby. Donaldson, patch me into the Pentagon, he commanded the man still at his station.
Yes, sir.
Donaldson switched on the screen that would allow them to see General Pendleton's video feed. The General's scowl appeared suddenly.
What do you have to report? What the hell is this, Major? Is this some kind of a joke?
The General looked less amused than normal. I'm sorry, what do you mean, sir? Jennings said confusedly. It was a matter of debate for weeks whether it was a tactical move or a screw-up. The General had expected something unusual in the Major's report, but seeing a filter of Major Jennings talking as a giant lobster on his screen was not what he expected. Specialist Donaldson looked like a giant shark with human teeth. The theory was the aliens from Vega had no desire to tangle with the strange and fearsome-looking beings on their own screens. The promotion General Pendleton spoke of was no longer on the table. He was this close to busting him back down to a captain's pay. After the report was completed, Major Jennings looked Donaldson over. The specialist was sweating and looked pale. I want to see you in my tent now, Jennings yelled. Donaldson simply nodded and gulped. Williams, who was nearby, turned and walked away. The two men entered his tent, and the Major sat at his desk. He instructed the specialist to have a seat. His face had a grimace on it that rivaled the ever-present scowl of General Pendleton. Donaldson watched as his CO pulled open a cabinet drawer full of hanging file folders. If he needed to pull out his personnel file, Donaldson was in for a particularly harsh dressing down. The Major moved the files deeper into the drawer and pulled out a bottle and 2 tumblers. Donaldson could finally breathe again, and his heart rate dropped to something more or less normal. The Major poured a double into each and handed one to Donaldson. His grimace expression finally melted away and was replaced by one of relief. He held up the tumbler in a toast. Here's to lobsters and sharks, knocking back the tequila and breathing in relief. Donaldson followed and coughed as it caught in his throat. Well, I hope you enjoyed my story. I've been playing around with different formats, and I think I've found the secret sauce, and this is the way that I'm going to do it from now on. So a quick introduction, the story, which will be essentially a movie, and an outro during the credits. So thank you to all who have been watching so far. I hope to grow the channel. I really appreciate your support, so please like, share, and subscribe. Comment, let me know what you think. If you like this format, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And I also like to do shoutouts. So to the staff at Greengate Medical, Danielle, Naz, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And believe me, it is a lot of work to make these videos. I don't have a staff, it's just me. So yeah, it's actually more challenging to produce the video than it is to write the story. Thanks again for watching.